She was the fiery redhead with a fearless spirit beloved for her unforgettable performances and unmistakable Irish charm. But behind Maureen O'Hara's graceful poise was a voice stifled for decades, until now. Do you believe old Hollywood had far more darkness than glamour? Type 1 for yes or 0 for no in the comments below. This is the chilling truth Maureen O'Hara kept for years, and it's finally coming to light. Before she spoke out, before the world learned what Maureen O'Hara had quietly endured, she was the fiery redhead who captivated generations. But behind the fame was a rise marked by grit, talent, and defiance. Don't skip ahead, because these early years will influence her to speak out about Hollywood's biggest creeps. Keep watching, and you'll see why. Rise to fame. Maureen O'Hara, born Maureen Fitzsimons on August 17, 1920, in Ranelagh, a suburb of Dublin, Ireland, came into the world with a spark that would eventually ignite one of the most legendary careers in Hollywood history. From a young age, Maureen displayed a natural talent for performance. Raised in a close-knit, artistic Irish family, she was deeply influenced by her mother's operatic singing and her father's appreciation for sports and culture. The Fitzsimons household was a place of creativity, resilience, and strong values traits that would shape O'Hara's identity both on and off the screen. Her artistic journey began in earnest at the prestigious Abbey Theatre Ireland's National Theatre. There, she rigorously trained in drama elocution and voice, refining her craft with a seriousness rare in someone so young. Though her striking red hair, porcelain complexion, and piercing green eyes were not fully visible in her early black-and-white films, they would later become her unmistakable trademarks once Technicolor came into full bloom. Maureen's ascent to stardom came swiftly. In the late 1930s, she caught the attention of Charles Laughton, the acclaimed British actor and filmmaker who was captivated by her talent and screen presence. He brought her into the fold of his production company, casting her in Alfred Hitchcock's Gothic thriller Jamaica Inn. Her performance caught the eye of international audiences, and she soon found herself cast alongside Laughton once again in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, playing the compassionate and tragic Esmeralda opposite Laughton's unforgettable Quasimodo. This breakout role marked Maureen's seamless transition from British cinema to Hollywood, where she would soon be celebrated as one of the industry's brightest stars. With each film, O'Hara defied expectations, not merely a beautiful face but a commanding presence who embodied independence, fire, and integrity. At a time when many actresses were limited to playing passive love interests or comic relief, O'Hara carved out a niche portraying strong, intelligent, and courageous women. Her performance in John Ford's How Green Was My Valley, which won the Academy Award for Best Picture, further cemented her place among Hollywood's elite. From swashbuckling adventures like The Black Swan to family favorites like Miracle on 34th Street, Maureen brought charisma, wit, and gravitas to every role she touched. But it was her legendary partnership with John Wayne and director John Ford that gave audiences some of the most beloved classics in American cinema. Films like Rio Grande McClintock and, most iconically, The Quiet Man showcased the unforgettable chemistry between O'Hara and Wayne. In The Quiet Man, she delivered one of the most passionate-spirited performances of her career as Mary-Kate Danaher, an Irish woman unafraid to demand love, respect, and dignity. Her scenes with Wayne, full of stormy conflict, romantic tension, and eventual reconciliation, have become part of film legend. Off-screen O'Hara was just as formidable. She wasn't afraid to speak up against the powerful studio executives of the time. In an industry dominated by male decision-makers, O'Hara fought for roles that matched her principles. She rejected scripts that portrayed women as weak or ornamental, and refused to let anyone dictate her appearance, famously stating, "I was the only leading lady in Hollywood who could speak with an Irish accent, and didn't have to change it." Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, she continued working steadily, her presence commanding both dramatic and comedic roles with ease. Outside of acting, she was a businesswoman and a proud mother to her daughter Bronwyn, born from her second marriage to director William Houston Price. But her greatest personal joy came later in life when she married Charles Blair, a decorated World War II pilot and aviation pioneer. Together, they ran Antilles Airboats, a seaplane business in the U.S. Virgin Islands, a striking departure from the sound stages of Hollywood. Their life together was filled with adventure and mutual respect until Blair's tragic death in a plane accident in 1978. Devastated, O'Hara retreated from the public eye, though she remained active behind the scenes, writing preserving film history and championing Irish heritage. Her autobiography, "'Tis Herself," published in 2004, revealed her wit, candor, and unwavering spirit, offering fans a glimpse into the triumphs and battles that defined her remarkable life. In 2014, after decades of contributions to film, Maureen O'Hara was awarded an honorary Academy Award, a moment that felt long overdue. As she walked onto the stage at age 94, still graceful, still fiery, the standing ovation that greeted her wasn't just for the films she made. It was for the trail she blazed, for the countless women she inspired, and for the authenticity she brought to a world often fueled by illusion. Today, Maureen O'Hara remains not just a star of Hollywood's golden age, but a symbol of grace, courage, and unbreakable spirit. From the Abbey Theatre to the Oscars, from Ireland to the Virgin Islands, her journey was anything but ordinary, and her story continues to inspire new generations who admire not only the actress but the remarkable woman behind the legend. It wasn't until later in life, long after the cameras had stopped rolling, that Maureen pulled back the curtain. What she revealed about the men behind the scenes stunned even the most jaded industry veterans. Maureen O'Hara reveals Hollywood's biggest creeps. Maureen O'Hara, the flame-haired Irish actress celebrated for her commanding performances and undeniable screen presence, was far more than a Hollywood icon. Behind the poise and glamour that made her a star, she was also a trailblazer, one of the earliest women in the film industry to speak openly about the challenges and injustices that many performers faced behind the scenes. At a time when actresses were often expected to remain silent, agreeable, and compliant within the rigid studio system, O'Hara stood her ground with dignity and resolve. She was known not just for her work in classics like The Quiet Man Miracle on 34th Street and How Green Was My Valley, but also for her unwavering sense of personal integrity. O'Hara refused to conform to the unspoken rules that governed how women were expected to navigate the business. In the 1940s and 1950s, decades before conversations about workplace respect and fairness were common, she had already begun pushing back against behavior that many simply tolerated or felt powerless to resist. Her reputation in Hollywood was that of someone who could not be manipulated. She was bold in her choices, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that made it clear she would not compromise her values for roles or fame. Working alongside powerful directors like John Ford and stars such as John Wayne and Tyrone Power, she proved again and again that talent, not submission, should be the measure of success. O'Hara later spoke candidly in interviews about how maintaining her principles had come at a cost. She admitted that her career advancement was at times slowed because she refused to accept certain demands that were quietly expected of women in the industry. In a 1957 interview, she explained how standing up for herself in an environment dominated by powerful decision-makers made her a target for professional retaliation. "I was insulted and humiliated because I stood firm," she said, referring to her experiences with some studio executives. She emphasized that while others might have chosen the easier path, she could not go against her conscience. Her words, though brave, were unusual for their time. The entertainment press of that era often served as an extension of the studio's image-making machinery, and public challenges to industry power were rarely tolerated. Still, O'Hara refused to be silenced. She believed in fairness and in the right of every actor, man or woman, to work without fear, coercion, or compromise. She did not shy away from pointing out inappropriate conduct in later interviews and memoirs, including behavior from some of the most renowned personalities in the film industry. She was very forthright about a number of people, one of them being the renowned filmmaker John Ford, who was also a highly contentious figure. A man who is not only influential in her professional life but also deeply complicated in his connection with her. Without a shadow of a doubt, John Ford was one of the most accomplished directors in the history of Hollywood, having contributed to the production of a startling number of critically renowned pictures such as The Grapes of Wrath, Stagecoach, and The Searchers, among others. During the golden age of American film, Ford was instrumental in defining the Western genre and shaping the era. A genuinely unstable and sometimes abusive man who struggled with his own personal demons and projected a significant amount of that anguish onto people around him. Notably, his actors was hiding behind the brilliant mask that he presented to the world. In addition, Maureen O'Hara was one of the few people who was able to bear the weight of his emotional instability. On many occasions, O'Hara and Ford collaborated on cinematic projects. One of the most well-known films is The Quiet Man, which was released in 1952 and is still considered a cinematic classic. Despite the fact that the movie presented an idealized view of Ireland and highlighted the magical relationship that existed between O'Hara and her co-star John Wayne, the interaction that existed between O'Hara and Ford behind the scenes was anything but beautiful. Not only was Ford a demanding and unpredictable director, but O'Hara stated in subsequent years that Ford was more than that. During the course of his interactions with her, he was capable of being emotionally manipulative, nasty, and even abusive at times. She recounted instances in which Ford publicly reprimanded her while she was working on set, reportedly for no apparent reason. As their professional relationship progressed, he exhibited characteristics such as being dismissive, domineering, and jealous. These characteristics grew increasingly evident. It is stated by O'Hara that Ford had an unrequited fascination with her which he never publicly confessed to having, but which frequently presented itself as hostility and scorn during their relationship. She was under the impression that Ford's intense feelings for her, along with his background in a strict Catholic household and his incapacity to deal with rejection, constituted a combustible emotional concoction. Ford reacted out using his authority as a director to control and frighten others rather than face his thoughts in an honest manner. In one of the more shocking accounts, O'Hara described how Ford allegedly used the act of slapping her across the face as a manner of instructing her during a film production. It is possible that under the studio system of the 1940s and 1950s, this type of behavior might have been allowed or even accepted. Nonetheless, O'Hara found it unbearable and expressed her disgust with it. Unwilling to tremble or be humiliated, she did not retreat, but instead maintained her ground and refused to back down. After some time had passed, she made the observation that it was just this reckless determination that made her a target for Ford's ire, but it was also probably the reason that he respected her, albeit with some reluctance. At a time when the film business was ruled by powerful men and strict hierarchies, Maureen O'Hara's courage to speak up about Ford's abusive tendencies is a monument to her fortitude and moral clarity. At the time, the film industry was dominated by powerful men. In no way did she make an effort to undermine Ford's legacy or to dismiss his abilities. The alternative was that she painted a nuanced picture of a guy who was divided between being brilliant and destroying himself. Ford was a person who O'Hara regarded as a tortured figure, one who possessed remarkable vision and deadly brutality, and someone who guided with his heart and punished his anxieties with his heart. O'Hara provided a thorough account of how her unwillingness to take part in improper approaches resulted in the loss of responsibilities and prospects. She was reminded of the fact that high-ranking men had warned her that if she did not participate in the game, she would never have another opportunity to work in the sector. Despite the strain, she maintained her composure, having faith in both her abilities and her sense of right and wrong. Her statements caused some members of the press to be astonished, but also struck a chord with many people who appreciated her as a person who refused to sacrifice herself or her ideals. As a lady who had been brought up in Ireland with strong Catholic traditions, O'Hara had been instructed to place the utmost importance on her own personal dignity. This was something that she brought with her into the harsh world of the entertainment industry. On the contrary, O'Hara never gave in regardless of the repercussions. As she continued to work, she frequently found herself drawn to parts that reflected the inner power that she possessed. Female protagonists who are fierce moms who are proud, and women who are self-reliant. The Quiet Man, Miracle on 34th Street, and How Green Was My Valley are just a few examples of the films that showcase her versatility and resiliency. She insisted that she be treated fairly and with respect behind the scenes, which was something that very few actors at the time thought they had the authority to do. Without ever giving in to Hollywood's more nefarious actors, she persevered and finally flourished despite the fact that her bravery came at a price. The bravery that she showed provided the foundation for subsequent generations. The early claims that O'Hara made were, when viewed through the lens of hindsight, precursors to the greater societal reckoning that would take place decades later. Maureen O'Hara had the courage to speak out about the toxic underbelly of celebrity, long before the Me Too movement, when actresses such as Rose McGowan and Ashley Judd and others came up with their own stories. In spite of the fact that many people at the time attempted to disregard her existence, history would demonstrate that her voice was one of uncommon honesty in a field that frequently rewarded quiet. O'Hara was ultimately acknowledged not just for her famous performances, but also for her ferocious independence and determination to tell the truth when so many others were frightened to do so. This recognition came in her latter years when Hollywood began to reflect on its own past with greater honesty. Not only does her legacy continue on in the films that she produced, but it also lives on in the honesty with which she lived her life and pursued her job. Though the truth she shared was unsettling, Maureen O'Hara found peace in finally being heard. And when she passed, it was not in scandal, but in serenity, surrounded by family having said what needed saying. As her career soared, so did the curiosity about her personal life. Yet while Hollywood buzzed with gossip, Maureen's real love stories were far more private and often more painful than the headlines let on. Struggle, personal life. In 1939, at just 19 years old, Maureen O'Hara made a decision that surprised even those closest to her. She entered into her first marriage. The lucky man was George H. Brown, an English film producer and assistant director she met during the making of Jamaica Inn, Alfred Hitchcock's moody adaptation of Daphne du Maurier's novel. Behind the brooding fog of Cornwall, on set a different kind of tension brewed, one of youthful passion, ambition, and hope. At the time, O'Hara was still finding her way in the film industry. Her star was rising quickly, but she was still new to fame, and perhaps even newer to love. The marriage, though sincere, was a whirlwind affair. The couple kept their union out of the spotlight, likely out of caution both for their careers and for themselves. Hollywood in those days wasn't known for forgiving youthful missteps, especially from a young actress trying to maintain her image. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Their union, built in the fast-paced, often artificial world of film production, lacked the solid foundation needed to survive long-term. By 1941, just 2 years after exchanging vows, Maureen and George had the marriage annulled. The experience, though brief, left its mark on her. It was a sobering lesson in the realities of love versus fantasy, something she would carry with her for years to come. But 1941 wasn't just a year of endings, it was also the beginning of a new chapter. Later that same year, O'Hara married William Houston Price, an American film director she had grown close to while working on several productions, including Dance Girl Dance. Price was talented, charming, and shared her creative energy. Their romance seemed more grounded, more mature, and it unfolded more naturally over time, forged in the fires of collaboration rather than youthful impulse. For a time, their marriage looked promising. In 1944, the couple welcomed their daughter Bronwyn Bridget Price, born on June 30th, a moment that O'Hara would later describe as one of the greatest joys of her life. Becoming a mother gave her a new sense of purpose. Known for playing strong, determined women on screen, Maureen now found herself drawing on that same inner strength in her real life as she embraced motherhood. But even as she cherished her growing family, troubles were brewing at home. William Price struggled with chronic alcoholism, a battle that began to erode the foundation of their marriage. What once had been a partnership started to feel like a burden, carried alone. The emotional toll was heavy, and Maureen, fiercely proud and unwilling to raise her daughter in chaos, found herself at a crossroads. By 1951, after a decade of trying to hold things together, O'Hara made the heartbreaking but necessary decision to end the marriage. It was not taken lightly. Divorce at that time was still stigmatized, especially for a woman in the public eye. But Maureen, ever the trailblazer, knew what she needed to do. Her choice to walk away was not just about ending a difficult chapter, it was about protecting her daughter and reclaiming her independence. From that point forward, O'Hara balanced single motherhood with a flourishing career, something few women in the 1950s had the opportunity or the strength to do. She didn't just survive, she thrived. She took on roles that challenged stereotypes and reflected the very resolve she showed in her personal life. And throughout it all, her daughter Bronwyn remained her greatest source of strength and inspiration. The early marriage may have been complicated, even painful at times, but they helped shape Maureen O'Hara into the tenacious, wise, and self-possessed woman the world came to admire, not just for her unforgettable performances, but for the fearless way she lived her life on and off the screen. In the years following her second divorce, Maureen O'Hara entered into what would become one of the most meaningful and quietly enduring relationships of her life, a romance that began in 1953 with Enrique Parra, a wealthy Mexican banker and influential political figure. Unlike the short-lived or turbulent chapters of her earlier marriages, this relationship unfolded with a unique depth and a sense of stability that O'Hara hadn't previously known in her personal life. Enrique Parra was no ordinary suitor. He was deeply embedded in the upper echelons of Mexican society, respected not only for his financial success but for his charisma, diplomacy, and worldliness. Being with Parra opened new doors for O'Hara. She was suddenly immersed in a vibrant cultural landscape very different from Hollywood's studio backlots. From the elite social circles of Mexico City to quiet private getaways far from the cameras, their life together straddled two very different yet equally glamorous worlds. Their romance lasted nearly 15 years, a remarkably long stretch given the transitory nature of celebrity relationships at the time. Though they never formally married, those closest to O'Hara recognized the depth of their commitment. Enrique Parra was more than just a partner. He was a steady presence during an era of both great professional success and personal reflection for Maureen. For O'Hara, who had always prided herself on independence and resilience, Parra offered emotional comfort and companionship without overshadowing her. He supported her career, respected her boundaries, and introduced her to diplomatic circles where her poise and intelligence made a lasting impression. And yet, despite their affection, the relationship eventually came to an end in 1967. The reasons were never fully detailed by O'Hara, who remained discreet about the more private aspects of their romance. However, it's widely believed that cultural expectations, public pressures, and perhaps the geographical distance between their careers may have contributed to the gradual unraveling of what had once been an intense bond. Still, O'Hara never spoke of the relationship with regret. In later interviews, she recalled Parra with warmth and respect, referring to him as one of the great loves of her life. While their time together may not have led to marriage, it offered her years of companionship, travel, personal growth, and peace, a rare gift for a woman so often defined by the spotlight. It wasn't until 1968, at the age of 48, that Maureen O'Hara found what many close to her described as the true love of her life, a man whose courage, brilliance, and quiet charm offered her something Hollywood never could piece: stability and a sense of being truly seen. That man was Charles F. Blair, Jr., a highly respected and decorated aviator whose accomplishments were as vast and extraordinary as any silver screen epic. Blair's resume was nothing short of remarkable. A former brigadier general in the United States Air Force, he was a trailblazer in transatlantic flight, the chief pilot for Pan American World Airways, and the founder of Antilles Airboats, a pioneering seaplane service based in the Caribbean. He had flown routes few dared to attempt and held the world record for the fastest solo flight over the North Pole. To Maureen, who had played bold, fearless women throughout her film career, Charles Blair was the real deal, a man of strength, intellect, and unwavering purpose. Their connection was instant and deep. Unlike the fleeting or strained relationships that had come before her marriage to Charles, was built on mutual admiration, companionship, and trust. O'Hara, who had spent most of her life in the glare of the spotlight, found herself drawn to Blair's world of aviation exploration and quiet integrity. He encouraged her to step away from the Hollywood treadmill to breathe and to enjoy the kind of personal freedom she had so rarely known. Not long after their wedding, Maureen made the bold decision to retire from acting. At the height of her fame, she walked away not out of defeat, but out of choice. She moved with Charles to the U.S. Virgin Islands, where they embraced a simpler life surrounded by sea sky and the hum of seaplanes. For once, O'Hara was not performing for cameras or navigating studio contracts. She was simply living, loving, and rediscovering herself as a woman beyond the screen. For 10 years, their marriage was filled with travel, adventure, and quiet joy. O'Hara supported her husband's aviation company and enjoyed the warm, community-centered life of the islands. But in 1978, tragedy struck. Charles was piloting one of his Antilles airboats on a routine flight when a mechanical failure led to a devastating crash. He was killed instantly. The suddenness of it, the sheer disbelief, shattered Maureen's world. In the same year, as if fate hadn't dealt her enough hardship, O'Hara was diagnosed with uterine cancer, a life-threatening condition that forced her into yet another battle. But just as she had done throughout her career, facing down studio bosses, critics, and typecasting, Maureen fought with everything she had. She underwent surgery, and thanks to early detection and expert care, the operation was successful. In time, she made a full recovery, though her heart remained scarred from the immense personal loss she had endured. The years that followed were filled with reflection and resilience. O'Hara rarely returned to acting, choosing instead to honor Blair's legacy and quietly advocate for veterans and aviators. She continued to be a loving mother-grandmother and a figure of grace for those who admired her not only as a screen legend but as a woman of substance. Even decades later, she would speak of Charles Blair with a warmth and reverence that never faded. She never remarried, and her wish to be buried beside him at Arlington National Cemetery was a final act of devotion to the man who had brought her the kind of love that doesn't fade with time. Peacefully death. On October 24, 2015, the world said goodbye to one of the last living legends of Hollywood's golden age. Maureen O'Hara, the Irish-born actress whose fiery spirit and commanding screen presence captivated audiences for decades, passed away peacefully in her sleep at her home in Boise, Idaho. She was 95 years old. Her death, attributed to natural causes, marked the end of an era, closing the chapter on a life that had not only spanned nearly a century, but had also bridged two worlds: the glamour and grit of classic Hollywood and the quiet contentment of a private life far removed from the spotlight. Known as the Queen of Technicolor for her striking red hair and luminous screen appeal, O'Hara became a symbol of strength and elegance, remembered just as much for her grace off-screen as for the unforgettable characters she portrayed on it. Throughout her career, she embodied bold, independent women who stood toe-to-toe with their male counterparts' roles that were ahead of their time in an industry that often preferred its leading ladies demure and deferential. From her emotionally resonant performance in How Green Was My Valley to the spirited Mary-Kate Danaher in The Quiet Man and the warm, maternal Doris Walker in Miracle on 34th Street, O'Hara brought heart dignity and authenticity to every role she touched. Her passing in Boise, where she had chosen to spend her final years in peaceful seclusion, was in keeping with her lifelong values of privacy, family, and personal integrity. Despite her international fame and iconic status, O'Hara was never one to chase attention. She withdrew from acting in the early 1970s not out of fading relevance but because she had already given Hollywood her best and wished to focus on a more grounded, fulfilling personal life. Friends and close family members often described her later years as contented and calm. While she remained proud of her cinematic legacy, she no longer felt the need to live in the public eye. Still, her influence never faded. Film historians, critics, and generations of admirers continued to celebrate her contributions, not only as a beloved actress, but as a pioneer who helped reshape the image of women in film. A testament to the depth of her character and life experience is the place she chose for her final rest, Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia, one of the most sacred and honored burial sites in the United States. There she lies beside her beloved husband, Charles Blair, a decorated World War II veteran U.S. Navy pilot and aviation innovator who later became the first civilian to command a commercial transatlantic flight. Maureen and Charles married in 1968, and their bond became one of the most treasured parts of her later life. He was not only her partner, but her greatest source of happiness in the years after Hollywood. Their time together was tragically cut short when Blair died in a plane crash in 1978, a loss that left O'Hara deeply heartbroken. Yet she carried his memory with her for the rest of her life, and in choosing Arlington as her final resting place, she ensured that their love story would endure in both memory and legacy. In reflecting on Maureen O'Hara's life, it becomes clear that she was far more than a film star. She was a woman of substance, conviction, and grace. She stood up for herself in an era when women in Hollywood had few allies. She demanded to be treated with respect and dignity both on screen and behind the scenes, and she refused to be reduced to a stereotype. Her death may have marked the physical end of a brilliant life, but her legacy lives on in every strong female character in every classic film that continues to move new audiences, and in every young actress who dares to take control of her own story. For all her beauty and talent, perhaps O'Hara's greatest strength was her authenticity. She lived life on her own terms and, in the end, left behind a legacy of timeless courage, elegance, and fierce independence. Maureen O'Hara didn't just play strong women, she was one. Her bravery gave others the courage to speak up. And, though the glamour of old Hollywood still shines, the shadows she exposed remind us of the price many paid in silence. Do you think Hollywood has truly changed since Maureen's day? Comment below, we want to hear your thoughts. If this story moved you, give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more truths behind the legends. Until next time, remember, history isn't always what it seems.